Yeah. Hello everyone, I Shiva Kumar, President of NISHTA, the Civil Service Society of Hansraj College, welcomes everyone to our Chief Speaker session. And our guest today is Dr. Gagandeep Khan, who don't need any sort of introduction because introducing her is like lighting a bulb in front of sun. Dr. Gagandeep is an Indian microbiologist and virologist who is a professor in the Department of Gastrointestinal Sciences at the Christian Medical College, Vellore. In 2019, she became the first woman to be elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society, and she has also been the recipient of the prestigious Infosys Prize. I wholeheartedly welcome ma'am from the entire fraternity of Nishta Society, Hansraj College, and on behalf of our esteemed principal, Dr. Rama ma'am. Today, ma'am will be addressing the gathering about the topic which is the need of time, that is the future of India's vaccination program. In the last, we will be taking some questions from our comment section that our team will be filtering out during the whole session. Thank you and over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much, Shiva, for inviting me to join you here. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. So, what I'd like to do is talk to you about where we are with vaccines today and where we might be going. As everyone is aware, India has probably given out more vaccines than any country except China. Currently, we are at 246 million doses of vaccines having been used, but that is only about 4% of our population being fully immunized and about 13.5% of the population having received at least one dose of the vaccine. So this is very worrying because what we want to be able to do is to get the vaccine to people as quickly as possible. And we need to make sure that we are clear about what we are doing with vaccines, why we are doing it, and what we hope to achieve through doing that, and what the timelines are. We started our vaccination program on the 16th of January with healthcare workers. We expanded that on the 1st of February to people who were essential workers. On the 1st of March, we gave vaccines to people who were over 60 years of age, as well as some that fitted what were very restricted criteria for people with comorbidities. After April 1st, we opened it up to everybody over the age of 45, and from May 1st, it has been permitted for all 18 and above to get immunized. The problem has been that even though we were able in April to vaccinate almost 4 million people in a day, the average in May dipped to 1.5 million. And even now, we have come back only to about an average of 2 million doses being given a day. If we proceed at this pace of 2 million doses a day, or even if we double it to 4 million doses a day, actually what we need to be doing for our population is about 2 billion doses. This is without children. So if we do 4 million doses a day, we are not talking about people being vaccinated by the end of this year or even by the end of next year. So we really need to be looking at what are all the sources of supply of vaccines. And currently we are in a situation where we have three vaccines that are being used in the country. The Covishield vaccine, which is 2 doses that are given 12 to 16 weeks apart. Covaxin, which is an inactivated vaccine with 2 doses given 4 weeks apart, and the Sputnik V vaccine, which has just come into the country, which is also given 4 weeks apart, has different storage requirements, but there are currently only a few 100,000 doses of this vaccine available. When will things improve? The government has projected that we will have 2.1 billion doses of vaccines between August and December of this year, I think it is an unrealistic estimate and, well, let's say a hopelessly optimistic estimate. And the reality will be something that is a lot less than that. But I think it's also important to emphasize that we managed last year without vaccines. And this year, we are dealing with a virus that has been more ferocious than the virus that we had last year. But it does look from the data that are emerging from India itself that this is a virus where we can deal with it using vaccines. So that's why vaccines are really important. We need to make sure that we get vaccines into as many arms as possible and as quickly as possible. But it isn't going to be feasible in the next few months. What can we do as a community? I think continuing to communicate the value of vaccines is important. Continuing to review the data on vaccines and how well they are working is important. Research continues to be important, but I think the most important thing that we can do as an educated community is to counter the misinformation related to vaccines that is spreading countrywide. Last night I got a picture of a man with coins and keys and many other things stuck to his chest. Apparently, there is a rumor now that if you're vaccinated, you become magnetic. I hope that you become magnetic in being more attractive to people and not necessarily to metal. But when you have these kinds of messages that are circulating without being independently evaluated by science, I think there is a lot for all of us to do in countering that message. If I can, what I would like to do is just share one slide with you. Would that be okay? Um, Shiva, can I go ahead and share a slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
Yes, ma'am.
it's a, it's actually I had done a full presentation, but I'm going to just share one slide that I want to tell you about. Can you see my slides now? Can you see my slides? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. It is visible.
Okay, so I'm not going to walk you through all these slides. What I'm just going to tell you about is one slide of data that comes from CMC. So maybe I'll just talk to you about variants. I think one thing that it's important for us to understand is that variants arise all the time. If we look at how important variants are, every time the virus multiplies, you have variants emerging, but most of the time the variants don't matter and they die out. Variants have to have some special characteristic to allow them to multiply and spread more. And the ones that so far have been successful have been really variants of two kinds. One, variants that can spread more easily, and two, variants that have evolved to escape the immune response. So variants that have spread more easily, the most important variant is probably the one that we saw in the UK, which is now called variant, the alpha variant. Essentially, what happened was that this variant was noticed in September, but by the end of November, December, it had taken over pretty much all of the places in the UK where the virus was circulating. It then spread around the world, including to India. It became the dominant strain in northern India, particularly for sequence data from Punjab. And this virus was 1.5 times more easily transmissible than the older versions of the virus. We also have viruses that have evolved to escape the immune response, particularly the one that is known as the gamma virus, which is B1351, which originally arose in South Africa. This one is able to escape the immune response for vaccines that are made based on older versions of the virus. But usually, after you get 2 doses of a vaccine that is doing well, even this variant, the B1351, can be blocked. We have data now from Israel and Qatar that show us that vaccines are working even against B1351. Now, the vaccine trials that were done, there were 3 trials that showed that the vaccines had lower efficacy when B1351 was circulating, but it was not that there was no efficacy. The vaccine was unable to prevent transmission, but it's still not clear to us. 3 months after we got this data, it's not clear to us that severe disease is not prevented. In India, from Maharashtra, we had the B1617 variant that arose, and this has some mutations that are similar to the South African strain and some others as well. We now know that this strain has 3 sublineages, and of these, B16172 is a variant of concern because it is 1.5 times more transmissible than the variant that is the alpha variant. And this, in hindsight, seems obvious to us. Particularly for all of you in Delhi, you will know that during the second wave, entire families were getting affected. And that usually indicates a variant that is more transmissible. If you look at this data here from the UK, the variant that is the Delta variant is shown in blue and the Alpha variant is in green. You can see what is happening here. The Delta variant is outcompeting the Alpha variant. It's 1.5 times more transmissible than the Alpha variant. It's outcompeting it and is a reason why the UK is thinking of not opening up, even though a large proportion of their population is already vaccinated. They want to be able to protect even more people before they open up. There is data from the UK that indicates that with the AstraZeneca vaccine, there is lower protection from the AstraZeneca vaccine against symptomatic infection with the Delta variant, about 33% with 1 dose and 60% from 2 doses, whereas the Pfizer vaccine has almost 87% protection against symptomatic infection with 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. Does this mean the Pfizer vaccine is better than the AZ vaccine? It seems to be that at least for symptomatic infection, it might be better, but I would wait for more data to come from the UK to show us that what is the protection against severe disease. Symptomatic infection includes mild disease also, and most disease is generally mild. So I would suggest that we wait till we have data that tells us how the vaccine is performing against severe disease before we worry too much about whether we need to think about shortening durations, etc. So I'm not going to walk you through this data, just show you that B117 is the alpha variant and B1612 is the delta variant. Now, there are data, you can see from data from many states in India that this bluish green color shows how B16172, the Delta variant, has really expanded in the month of April 2021. Now, this is the data slide that I wanted to show you. This is data from CMC Vellore. We have about 10,000 employees here. About 7,000 of them were fully vaccinated from January to March, and about 1,800 of them had received at least one dose of vaccine. 7,000 fully vaccinated and about 1,800 with one dose. You can see that, you will hear lots of reports. He was vaccinated, even then he got infected. She was vaccinated with two doses and she still wound up in the ICU. These are called breakthrough infections. And what I'd like you to see is that 10% of people who received the first dose developed an infection in the second wave. Similarly, 10% of people who were fully vaccinated developed an infection in the second wave. But look now at how many people developed an infection that was bad enough for them to be hospitalized, need oxygen therapy or ICU care. You can see that it was 4% of people who had not received vaccine that needed to be hospitalized, 0.7% that needed oxygen therapy, 0.5% needed ICU care. If you look at one dose, you can see that hospitalization is reduced to 1.2% in people who have received one dose and 0.9% in people who have received two doses. Requirement for oxygen therapy also much lower. Requirement for ICU care also much lower. So the relative risk or the protective effect of one dose of vaccine, 61% against infection, 70% against hospitalization, 94% against oxygen therapy, 95% against ICU care. Two doses of vaccine, similar. This is data from CMC in southern India at a time where we know that there was the Delta variant that was prevalent. We don't know exactly how many of these infections that we saw were actually the Delta variant, but it's pretty clear that the vaccines are working very well against severe disease. Little less well against infection, but very well against severe disease. So there are many questions that remain, why does the dosing interval change? Why will vaccines protect? How long will it last? What are side effects, etc. But I think we can take those up as questions for discussion. So over to you, Shiva.
Okay. Yes, surely, ma'am. These are the questions which were put in the comment section. Ma'am, the first question is that what are the basic differences between the vaccines that are available in India right now?
So if we look at the three vaccines that we have, two of the vaccines are adenovirus vectored vaccines. The Oxford vaccine, which is Covishield vaccine, is based on a chimpanzee adenovirus that carries the sequence for the spike protein. And the Russian Gamaleya vaccine, Sputnik V, also has two doses, but their two doses are made up of two different adenovirus vectors. One is adenovirus 26 and the second one is adenovirus 5. They also carry the sequence for the spike protein. Both of these are only delivering the message for how to make the spike protein. They do not set up an infection in humans. The third vaccine that we have is Covaxin. Covaxin is the whole virus which has been treated with a chemical to make sure that it does not replicate. So this is an inactivated vaccine which is given along with an adjuvant. And the purpose of the adjuvant is to make sure that there is a good immune response to the vaccine. So three vaccines at the moment. but many more vaccines on many other platforms still to come. Zydus Cadila is making a DNA vaccine. Genova in Pune is making an mRNA vaccine. Biological E in Hyderabad is making a protein vaccine. So we will have many vaccines on many platforms soon if all of these are successful.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a vaccine hesitancy coming in India due to the fact, and it's a new fact that it may lead to blood clotting. Is it possible, and what are the probabilities of it?
So I think there has been a lot of discussion around this blood clotting. It's important to understand that COVID itself causes blood clotting. When you get COVID severe disease, your chances of blood clots are much higher than any clots you might get because of vaccination. So that's the first thing. In fact, COVID is a virus that has multiple ways of causing disease. We know that it infects the lungs, but what lot of people don't know is that it also has the capacity to infect endothelial cells that line our blood vessels. And that's the reason that with COVID, many of the severe effects that we see of COVID, kidney damage, etc., heart damage, are because there are both microthrombi, very tiny blood clots, as well as macrothrombi, large blood clots that happen in COVID disease. With the vaccines, it is emerging that the adenovirus vectored vaccines most likely have a very rare side effects that may be associated not with all clotting, right? It's very important to understand that every clot that you get is not related to a side effect of the vaccine. It is a combination of clotting with a low platelet count. And the reason that it happens is that it's called an idiosyncratic reaction, an unpredictable reaction in some people, because they start to make, when they are vaccinated, they start to make antibodies to something they may already have, also antibodies to something called platelet factor 4, which is released by platelets. Normally you don't have antibodies to platelet factor 4, but some people do. And when you have antibodies to platelet factor 4, it causes the platelets to clump together, and that leads to clotting. So the combination of thrombosis with low platelet count, clots with low platelet count, and presence of antibodies to platelet factor 4 is something that constitutes a side effect. We know this for the AstraZeneca vaccine. We know this for the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. Sputnik claims that it does not have such a side effect, but both the AstraZeneca and the Johnson and Johnson were confirmed by independent studies done not by the company but done by government surveillance programs. For Sputnik, that has not been done. There are no reports. So I think this is likely to be a class effect with all adenovirus vectored vaccines, and it is very rare. It is estimated to be 1 in 100,000 people who receive the vaccine, but in younger people, it may be up to 1 in 40,000 people who receive the vaccine. Now, what is the chance of a clot because you get COVID? What is the chance of a clot because you get the vaccine? The chance of a clot when you get COVID is much higher than if you get the vaccine when there is a lot of disease in young people. In the West, many countries have decided that they are not going to use the AstraZeneca vaccine anymore in younger people. And that is fair for them to make that decision because the pandemic has been controlled in those countries. Their cases have gone down. So when the number of young people getting infected with COVID has gone down, the risk of clotting, risk of severe disease from COVID itself is low for children. So it's a relative benefit risk ratio. When there's lots of disease around, it makes sense to take the vaccine, even if there is a rare side effect that can happen. When there is very little disease around, then it doesn't make sense to take the vaccine, because then the risk of side effects with the vaccines becomes more significant. So in India, we have not reached that point yet. And even in the West, if cases climb, then we'll still be in a situation where the benefit will be with the vaccination.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, how much effective are the vaccines against the strains that are coming or may keep coming in future? And ma'am, our college professor, this question has come out of the fascination of our college professor, that may it happen that like continents like South Africa, which will be vaccinated at the last, may get variant and it will be spreaded out in the whole world, and it may create a situation where we have to vaccinate, where we have to start the vaccination from a 0 point. May it happen in the nearby future because of the variants that will keep coming out.
Variants arise anytime there is virus multiplication. Each time the virus multiplies, you have a chance for variants to arise. And if your population is not vaccinated and you are unable to control the spread of disease, the chances of variants is higher. It's just a question of how much viral multiplication is there, and that will determine how much you will see in terms of variants emerging. So absolutely, if Africa does not get vaccines, chances of variants arising in Africa is very high. The same thing can happen in India. It's already happened. We had unvaccinated populations, and we had a variant that took over. And a lot of the reason why the second wave was so sharp was because we had at least two variants, both alpha and delta variants, that were circulating in India at high levels. And that was one of the reasons why the peak was so sharp. Will vaccines work against these variants? So far, all vaccines are working to some extent against all variants. Will this change? It will depend on the new variants that arise. If we can get everybody vaccinated quickly, we reduce the chances of these variants arising. And it's important that we continue to focus on that. Will we come to a stage where the vaccines don't work against the variants at all, and we have to start with, revaccinating everybody? It's certainly possible, but it's a very remote chance.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, next question is like a very peculiar one, that vaccinating the whole population with an emergency vaccine, isn't it a risk that we are taking to vaccinate the whole population with some emergency vaccine?
I think this is why we need to be able to rely on our regulators. The purpose of regulatory authorities in every country is that they should assure us that whatever drugs or medicines we have are safe, are ones that work, that are of high quality. These three are the main functions of any regulator, and the stronger your regulatory system is, the more confident you can be that the vaccines that we are using are vaccines that are appropriate for solving the problems for which we are taking the vaccines. Now, in the case of the Covishield vaccine, this is something that has been reviewed by the Indian regulator, it has been reviewed by the UK regulator, it has been reviewed by the European regulator, it has been approved by WHO for emergency use listing. So we can be reasonably confident that with all these regulatory reviews, we are getting a safe and efficacious product. In the case of the Covaxin, it has been reviewed by the Indian regulator, and data has been partially submitted to the WHO. It has also been reviewed by regulators of countries to which Covaxin would like to export its vaccines, and it has been licensed in 5 countries, I think. Uh, Brazil had some questions about the Bharat Biotech vaccine and their process for making it, and the company has addressed those concerns. So, at least in terms of the fact that the Indian regulator has approved this vaccine, we have reasonable confidence that it is safe and efficacious. For the Sputnik V vaccine, it has been reviewed by the Russian regulators and the Indian regulators. It is not yet approved by WHO, but it is further along in the WHO review process than Covaxin is. So hopefully we will have assurance of its quality also through the WHO emergency use listing soon. So I think with any drug, any vaccine, you take a risk. Even if you take paracetamol, you're taking a risk because paracetamol has the ability to cause liver damage, right? You can it damage your liver, your kidneys by taking these drugs. We take them anyway.
The next question is that there are some theories coming that taking different vaccine doses might be more effective than taking both doses of one vaccine. How much is this statement true, and what is your take on this?
So I think in terms of what are being called mix and match studies, it is something for us to think about. I don't think we should be randomly experimenting with vaccines or doing it by accident, as has happened in the program. This is something that should be done systematically, and at least based on immunology, there is a plausible basis for saying that we could consider this approach. So we should do these studies, we should get the results from those studies, and then make a decision about what combinations are most appropriate for which age groups that need to receive these vaccines.
So as far as right now, so it is not
Right now,
advised to
no
take both
recommendations.
different vaccines.
No.
My professor, like there are lots of questions from our professors this side because Delhi University is an area which is hard hit by the COVID and especially the professors. So my professor has asked that why some people who were fine earlier had symptoms after the vaccination, like it starts with post-vaccination fever and mild side effects and persist for long. Should they get tested again after vaccination?
So I think one of the things that is not being emphasized enough by people who are giving the vaccines is that if you've taken the Covishield vaccine, about 1/3 of people develop fever that lasts for at least a couple of days. The symptoms are worse with the first dose than with the second dose, whereas for other classes of vaccines, usually symptoms are worse for the second dose than for the first dose. Now, these reactions can take some time to settle down, but they do settle down. And usually, after the second dose, everybody is fine. There have been reports of certain kinds of side effects, like, for example, one of the reports that I know is not an official matter of study is the fact that a lot of people develop zoster after the AstraZeneca vaccine. I know of at least 8 or 9 people who have done that, and yet this is not something that has been picked up by the Indian authorities, to my knowledge, or is being investigated. Documenting this kind of side effect that happens in a lot of people is very important so that we can tell people what to expect. These are not dangerous, these are not life threatening side effects. They are a consequence of taking the vaccine, yes. But if you know what you should be expecting to experience, then you feel like, okay, I expected this, it's all right that it's happening. In terms of people being ill and needing to get themselves tested, One of the things that is important to recognize is that the incubation period of the virus itself is between 2 and 14 days. A lot of people that are reporting that they have tested positive after vaccination are reporting this after the first dose and usually within the first couple of weeks after the first dose. If that is the case, then you should not, the vaccine starts to work only 3 weeks after the first dose. There is no protection after the first two doses. And there is a significant amount of concern when the virus is circulating very widely and vaccination centers are crowded, whether you're actually acquiring the infection at the vaccination center. So you get vaccinated and you're exposed to the virus at the same time, then you might wind up being positive in the first couple of weeks after vaccination. If you have symptoms that are not the general side effects of the vaccine, which include fever and fatigue, then you should definitely get yourself tested, irrespective of the time of vaccination.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, if someone has a common cold or fever, not because of COVID or after post vaccination, so should they also get the vaccine at the earliest, or should they wait for some time?
If you just have some kind of illness, wait till you recover and then get vaccinated.
So is there some risk about this to take vaccine?
No, no.
Okay. Ma'am, how long these vaccines are expected to mitigate the risk of virus? Are we likely to get booster shots of these vaccines in the years to come, or is it going to be a time suffice scenario?
So we've had the vaccine since December, right? In people since December. So really all the information that we have now is short-term protection. We have no idea of long-term protection, but we can make some predictions based on the antibody responses that we have seen so far and the more detailed studies of immune response that have been done by some groups. Essentially, from infection, we know that infection itself protects about 80-85% for at least 7 to 11 months based on people who were infected early in the pandemic. We should expect vaccines to behave very similarly and give us at least protection for between 6 months to a year. Will it last longer than that? It depends very much on the variants, and we will continue to study this. Right now, predictions are that we will have protection for at least 1 year and possibly longer. Will we need boosters? My own thinking is that given how well the vaccines are working against disease, I don't think that we are going to wind up in a situation that is going to be like influenza, where you need to take one shot every year. I think we will wind up in a situation where, worst case, you will probably need to take a new vaccine or a booster if a new variant arises or spreads, and that too might be every 3 to 5 years. But we don't really know enough to be confident in our predictions.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, what is your opinion about the new government policy of vaccination? And do you really think that we can achieve the 100% vaccination till December as the government promised? And there's an additional question that when will the children will be vaccinated?
So I think ultimately all adults need to be vaccinated. But I think that in terms of what the government did, it went too fast. I think you should make sure you should set a target for each group. You should achieve that target and then move to the next group. Now we are winding up in this situation where during the month of May, you had more vaccine given to 18 to 45-year-olds than you had vaccine given to older individuals. So that's not a situation that is appropriate for a country with limited supply. If we said, for example, 70% of all healthcare workers should be vaccinated before we move to essential workers, 70% of essential workers should be vaccinated before we move to 60-year-old. That way, when you're doing a strategy that is a very targeted population based strategy, right now it's based on occupation or age, and this is distributed across the country. It just makes sense that instead of making it repeated visits to that same group again and again and again to try and push the numbers up, you should try and finish or seriously address one group before you move to the next. We have not done that. And I hope at least now, with this clarification of all 18 and above being pretty much similar, there is some hope that we will not have such messy immunization going forward, because it is being done using that, but also using prior uh, vaccination history, how many doses, how much wastage a state has had. These are complicated because it's not clear that all the data systems that are available in states are actually talking to the central database. We've heard of very high wastage rates being reported from some states, and then the state says that's not true, that's because it's not functioning. So, making sure that the allocation mechanisms are clear and are based on eligible populations, I think is what makes the most sense. Once you have that, then for states to distribute even within their priority populations, because the right now the center is telling you, has laid out rules, but hopefully from latter part of June, states will be able to develop their own allocation mechanisms. I also think states should be thinking about experimenting a bit. If you were to, let's say, do a lot of vaccination in a particular location, could you actually suppress disease? For example, if we prioritized all of Delhi, vaccinated everybody in Delhi, would this mean that Delhi wouldn't have a fifth wave, right? I think it's an experiment that's worth doing. Whether it's Delhi or Bangalore or Hyderabad doesn't matter. But some large, densely populated city, we should try it out. Similarly, we should try different models for rural areas. What is the best approach to being able to vaccinate people and use that to prevent severe disease and mortality?
Okay, okay, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, my next question is that what particular people should avoid taking the vaccines? What traits they should have to avoid the vaccine?
So a lot of people worry, particularly if they have autoimmune diseases, if they have some other illness that is ongoing at this time, people who have food allergies, drug allergies, they worry, can I safely take the vaccine? The short answer to all of that is, if you don't have an allergy to the vaccines that are available now, you can take the vaccines. There are no contraindications.
Okay. Ma'am, what is your take on the nationalization of vaccines? Should private firms also play a major role? Because there are certain people, theorists, who are saying that it will help in boosting the vaccination process in India, because government alone can't do in a very specific period. What's your take on this?
So, right now, let's look at routine immunization as an example. In rural areas, the bulk of routine immunization is provided by the government. In urban areas is where private players really make a difference. They have a significant proportion that can be reached through their networks. It's estimated at about 30% of vaccines, even in private areas. Even if we said it's 40% in some cities, that's fine. It's 40% in cities and less than 10% in rural areas. I think rather than private players as such, we should be looking at civil society organizations and NGOs to partner with the government in the delivery of vaccines in rural areas. What you really need is a mapping of the ground situation in each location. Where are people? And this is something district administrations can do well. If I have to reach this population, who should my partners be to be able to do that? Many of them will be private players, but they will not necessarily be private hospitals that will do this. So we need organizations that are on the ground that help us amplify vaccination and make sure that we achieve equity, so it doesn't become a situation of cities are easy to reach, so let's immunize all the cities and leave out all the rural areas.
Okay. And ma'am, one very frequently asked question is that, ma'am, can someone donate plasma if they have recovered from COVID very recently? This question is very frequently asked.
So plasma works if the person who has recovered from COVID has very high neutralizing antibody titers. The tests that are done on plasma by commercial labs, that are done, the antibody tests that people are getting done after vaccination, do not measure neutralizing antibodies. Plasma works if it is given in the first 3 days after somebody has symptoms, right? When are requests for plasma made? Requests for plasma are made when a person is really sick and in hospital. By the time you get to the hospital, you are much more than 3 days into your symptomatic illness. So therefore, plasma is not recommended. It will not help anybody who is later than 3 days into the course of their illness. It's a waste. Don't do it.
Okay. And ma'am, can COVID
Okay,
19?
hang on. Can I say something else?
Yes, yes, sure, ma'am.
Today is Blood Donation Day. And if you want to donate plasma, don't worry about the plasma part of it. Go and make a blood donation. India needs all the blood it can get. It can use all the blood it can get. Please, please go out and be blood donors.
Yes, and especially people like me who have O negative blood group. Yeah.
Wow. As much
Uh,
as possible.
yes. Ma'am, can COVID 19 be can be spreaded through breastfeeding by a woman?
No. So there
Okay.
have been studies that have been done. In fact, women who are infected or vaccinated pass their antibodies through breast milk to their baby. There is no restriction on breastfeeding babies, even if you are acutely infected with COVID. Go ahead and do it.
And ma'am, I think there's no complications if someone is taking the vaccines during a female, especially during
No
periods or during
complications.
pregnancy. Okay.
No complications.
Okay. And ma'am, next question is something that is completely on the prediction that if third wave will come up in India, that children will be the prone victims of this. How this is
No.
assessed? How is this?
No. Is that clear? Children will not be more affected in the third wave. Let's think about it from a point of view of biology, right? Children have been infected in the first wave and in the second wave. And what we know is that the proportion of children that develop severe disease among all infected children is very, very low. Why would we think that in the third wave, children would be more affected? One, there is a virus that specially infects children and does not infect adults, right? For that, children need to have a receptor that is different from the receptor in adults. We know that children's respiratory tracts, guts, after the first year of life, after the first kind of 9 months, really, there are no receptors there that are not found in adults. Mostly anything that changes in the first month after a child is born. So they're not going to be new receptors. So there won't be any, you would need a special virus. The special virus cannot do anything different in children from what it does in adults. This hypothesis is coming from the fact that people think that by the time the third wave comes, all adults will be completely protected from disease. That means that when we see cases, we will see them in only people who have not been vaccinated. And because children will not be vaccinated, we will see disease in children. It's not going to be more than the proportion that we are seeing now. The proportion is a small proportion, has been a small proportion for the first and second waves, not going to change during the third wave. Remember also that if no vaccine works 100% of the time, vaccines have between 80, 90, 70, 80, 90% efficacy, which means that there are a lot of adults that will continue to be susceptible, continue to be infected, continue to get sick, continue to require ICU, even after they have received 1 or 2 doses of vaccine. So we will expect that disease. But the good news that is coming out is that if all adults are immunized, disease in children is reduced. And this is data that has come out only in the last week from the US, essentially showing that if you are in communities where all the adults are immunized, then disease in children reduces 50%. So, in fact, the third wave depends on how well we can vaccinate people, how well we can, until we get vaccinated, make sure that we are maintaining all the COVID appropriate behaviors. So, there is no special reason for us to worry about children.
Okay. Ma'am, can you tell us that why it has happened that during the first wave we were not having vaccines, but the fatality rate was very low. But in the second wave we had vaccines, we had good contact tracing, but still we had a very high fatality rate.
I think the important thing to do is to look at the numbers. I think the absolute numbers were very different between the first and the second waves. The second wave hit us much harder than the first wave. So, in absolute numbers, we had many, many more deaths. In the first wave, I think we had a lot of misclassification. We also had it during the second wave, but maybe not as much. Case fatality rate and infection fatality rate depend very, very much on accurate classification of deaths. And we know that our death classification was not accurate in the first wave or the second wave. So I would not overinterpret the data. I would not claim that the rates have changed. I will agree that there were many more deaths the second time around, but I also think that is a function of the number of cases that we had being much higher in the second wave.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, so we have, I think, exceeded the time limit. It's 1 hour. So, ma'am, I want to ask a very last question: that what precaution should one take to influence the masses about the vaccines? Because there is vaccine hesitancy, especially in the rural areas. So, the student community like us, what precautions, what actions should we take to communicate the importance of vaccine to the areas?
So I think the one thing that we should focus on, people don't like to be taught. People like to be shown. And I think using data is the best way to show people what the effect of a vaccine is. So, what will happen if I take a vaccine, right? I can move about more confidently. I can be more sure that even if I wear a mask and I maintain COVID appropriate behavior, I have a sort of mental peace that I am not a risk to others. and others are not a risk to me. If I think about what my life is going to look like with a vaccine, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable with more activities. And as people around me get vaccinated, we become a safer and safer community. We can interact more. We can go back to doing some of the things that we enjoy doing. Sitting and having a cup of tea with friends. It's been a while since many of us had the ability to do that without being worried about what the case might be. So, I think a lot changes in societies once vaccination reaches a certain level. At an individual level, it matters. At a community level, it matters. As an entire population, it matters. If we look at what's happening in the West, look at Israel, where they were in January and where they are in May. May is practically back to normal, and they've been able to do that because they've been able to vaccinate their populations. Children are not yet immunized. They're going down to age 12 now, but children are able to run around because the adults are protected. So, this is what we should be hoping to achieve around the world as quickly as possible. So, if you, as young people, can think about it yourselves, arm yourself with facts. Lots of people talk about, vaccines make women sterile. What is the basis of that? It's actually rubbish, right? I have done some explainers, but I don't know how to reach young people. You do. So think about it, get the facts, get the message out. Vaccines are safe, vaccines are effective. Protecting ourselves is important, protecting the population is important. And we need to do all of this together.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.